Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Anna Kalczyńska. 3 Russian warplanes violated Estonian airspace. Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal said his government decided to request NATO Article 4 consultations. Not only this, also today, 2 Russian fighter jets violated the safety zone of Poland's Baltic drilling platform in the Baltic Sea. This violence and this incident occurred among rising tensions on the eastern flank of NATO, Polish forces notified. Joining me now to discuss these 2 incidents is Stephen Moore, founder of Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us again.
Of course, Anna, great to be with you always.
Thank you. So, obvious escalation on Russian part. So how many times, how far will Russia go to probe NATO until there will be a proper response?
Yeah, that is a good question, isn't it? It looks like Estonia is going to invoke Article 4 of NATO, which requires consultations with all NATO members. And this has been invoked now 9 times in the last 75 years. 2 of them have been in the last 3 weeks, and the other one was Poland. So this is not getting better. What's happening here is Vladimir Putin is testing how far he can go. As we know, Vladimir Putin only responds to strength. And if he is not, if there's not a strong response, that's what you get. And what is not obvious maybe to many of your viewers, but those of us who watch Congress, is that there's about a little bit more than $200 million in aid to Baltic states that was canceled a week or 2 ago by the administration. And, again, that is a show of withdrawal by the United States, of a lack of commitment, a lack of strength by the United States, which invites Russian aggression.
Exactly. Well, on the part of Europeans, diplomatic uproar, but apparently it proves no effective at all. So with more and more aggressive moves on the Russia's part, if those transgressions were to continue, would you consider shooting down a Russian fighter jet?
Listen, I think that, I think that all steps should be taken to be as cautious as possible, But in my view, the smart move here is to make a no-fly zone above Ukraine and all of the European states bordering Russia, because, just make it clear that anything that flies into this zone will be shot down by NATO jets. And then, is it a mistake? Well, 12 minutes into an airspace is not a mistake. Is 19 drones a mistake? Well, hard to think how 19 drones could be a mistake, but there's this conversation. So I think there needs to be a sense of clarity and then a strong response should that clear instruction be ignored by Putin.
Exactly. Well, the strong response remains a problem to NATO, apparently. And if Russia were to violate the no-fly zone, what then?
Well, again, I think that, we need to be clear with Russia that that you can't operate in this airspace. And if you do, then, then whatever's in that airspace will be shot down, whether it's a Shahed drone, a Kinzhal missile, or a MiG. And then if Russia violates that, then it's pretty clear Russia's intention. And if that, and then what happens after a plane gets shot down, that gets increasingly gets to be a bigger war. But we don't have the choice right now of whether this war gets bigger. That choice falls to Vladimir Putin. And as he's made it clear, he wants to make the war bigger. So we can either stop him now and push back on him now, or we can wait, until he sends Shaheds into downtown Warsaw like he does downtown Kyiv.
Exactly. But maybe it doesn't have to be that far. Maybe we don't have to strike down the jets violating our space. Maybe it's proper, perhaps, to send some Shaheds over the direction of Kaliningrad? Why not violate the Russian airspace mutually?
I like the way you think. Yeah. I think that that's an interesting thought. One I hadn't had. But yeah, so why not? I mean, Kaliningrad's really close. You guys could just send some of your jets over that and see how Russia likes it. That's an interesting thing. I like it.
Some of the pundits bring about incidents back from 2015 when Turkey shot down actually a Su-24, a Russian bombardier. But at that time it was a war zone, so on the border of Syria and Turkey, so it was probably different. However, it took only 12 seconds for the Turkish military to shut down the plane. So now we have a situation of 12 minutes on the territory, in the airspace of Estonia, with no proper reaction. How do you assess this situation? The same goes for the 19 drone, which penetrated Polish airspace in the middle of the night, and only 3 of them were shot down.
Yeah, that was, that was something that those of us in Kyiv were looking at. It's like, there's 800 drones some nights that come into Ukraine, and almost all, 90% of them are shot down. And so I think that there needs to be some close collaboration between Ukrainian air defense and Polish air defense. And I think this all comes down to the big fundamental question of Europe, right? Is Europe at war? Does Europe believe it's at war? And because if it believes it's at war, it's going to start making policy changes so that it's not okay for Russian jets or Russian drones to fly into European cities. It's going to stop buying liquid natural gas from Russia. It's going to stop buying petroleum from Russia. So in my view, or if you're in Belgium, you're going to start opening up those frozen Russian assets. So here is the fundamental problem with Europe. Europe needs to decide if it's at war or if it's not at war. And if it's not at war, then, go ahead and sip cocktails in Paris and enjoy cheap Russian natural gas while the cities of Eastern Europe are being bombed. But if Europe's at war, then it needs to take action.
Well, both Europe and bilaterally, and NATO has sent a lot of aircrafts to Poland, but the response is non-existent, basically. What I'm trying to say is that Europe probably perceives this war, this conflict with Russia, as a hybrid war. My question is, where is the line dividing the hybrid war from a real war? I mean, what has to happen?
From a kinetic war. Yeah.
Right. So what has to happen for Europe and NATO to really understand that the conflict is real?
Yeah. Well, looking back, it took several years and the bombing of the entire Pacific Fleet in World War II for America to engage in a war against Japan and then ultimately against Europe and against the Germans in Europe. And, again, going back to the American analogy, 9/11, we had to lose 2 towers in downtown New York with about 3,000 people before we decided to take action against the hybrid war being waged by Islamic extremists that had been going on for years. So, I guess it's the nature of humans to delay and delay and delay, because life's pretty good right now for most of the world, and so nobody wants to go to war, and so no one wants to make that difficult decision of a dollar invested now is going to pay dividends down the line. And so we may just have to employ more dollars and the very precious resource of Polish, Estonian, American, French lives. So
understood.
That's just the nature of people.
Absolutely. However, let's talk real. We had some theoretical discussion about a proper or possible response. But the reality is that NATO will once again gather next week on this time on the request of Estonian Prime Minister to discuss and consult within the realm of NATO Article 4. What can be the NATO response under President Donald Trump in light of his latest remarks?
Yeah. So here's what I think is that, you look at the Russian economy and it's not doing well. And when I say life's pretty good everywhere, it's getting worse and worse in Russia. And, the countries at greater than 20% interest rates, Putin has spent through almost all their national wealth fund. The corporate structure there is swimming in debt, and they're paying more and more for people to have to go to war. So they're paying soldiers more and more to get them to go to Ukraine. So this is not sustainable. And Russia is a gas station with an army. If you cut off their funding from oil and gas, then they're going to be a lot less able to wage war. So, the best way to do this without kinetic use in Europe is, start pulling over. In the Baltic Sea, there's dozens and dozens of the ghost fleet, the Russian ghost fleet, that are illegally transporting oil for sale in primarily India and China and in Turkey, as you point out. Let's just start having a few European and American battleships, destroyers, start pulling these folks over and saying, this is illegal. You can't do this. And then it's, the ball's in Russia's court.
Well, you've been following the news, certainly, and you know about the 19th latest sanction package being discussed by the European Union. It's been just announced, and it targets the ghost fleet as well as frozen assets. So do you believe that this also could be a push, being a response, obviously, to the call of US President? But can this be a push that will show Vladimir Putin that there's no joking around?
Well, my organization, the Ukraine Freedom Project, regularly polls Republican voters in America, and there's 84% support for sanctions. Everybody wants to sanction Russia, and it's really not the sanctions. It's not the legislation that is the problem. We got, as you point out, this is the 19th sanctions package. The problem is that they're not enforced. Is that there's the trade between Germany and Kazakhstan increased by some dramatic percent after the Russians invaded Ukraine. It's not because there's so many more things that the Kazakhs want from Germany. It's because it's a conduit for sanctioned items to go from Germany to Russia through Kazakhstan and some of the other Central Asian countries. And again, we mentioned the Ghost Fleet. So legislation is just a form of talk. Speeches are talk, and these things need to be enforced. And promises by European and American governments to be tough on Putin need to be backed up with actual force. They need to be enforced, and that's the problem we have.
Stephen Moore, thank you so much for joining us this evening, discussing the latest issues and the latest development here in the Baltics. Thank you so much once again, and have a good night.
Call me anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you once again. And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned to TVP World for more news and commentaries.